Live from London, this is BBC News. Sir Keir Starmer meets with his Irish counterpart in Dublin, aiming to reset their country's relationship post-Brexit. In his first major interview since the election, the Prime Minister tells the BBC that the Tory government broke the NHS.
Everybody watching this who has used the NHS or relatives have know that it's broken. They know that it's broken. That is unforgivable, the state of our NHS. The last government broke the NHS.
Reaffirming the special relationship, the US Secretary of State is to head to the UK on Monday. Post Office campaigner Sir Alan Bates marries his partner Susan on Sir Richard Branson's Necker Island. And the sweetest of sounds, did the Sugar Babes turn it round at Radio 2 in the park? Welcome to BBC News, I'm Kasia Madera. It's 5 years since a British Prime Minister visited the Republic of Ireland after tensions over Brexit. But Sir Keir Starmer has been in Dublin saying that the moment is right for a meaningful reset in relations. He's been holding talks with his opposite number, Simon Harris. Our Ireland correspondent Sarah Gervin reports.
After years of strained relations, this was the moment Sir Keir Starmer was given 100,000 welcomes to Dublin. There were smiles and handshakes as he and his Irish counterpart were presented with football jerseys.
This will be proudly worn in North London before too long.
Both leaders said this was an opportunity to renew and deepen the friendship between Britain and Ireland.
I know as two new leaders of our respective countries, we both said we wish to really place British-Irish relations on a new path, and I really appreciate the time that you've given to that since taking office.
It's really important to me, to my government, and I think it is the moment for reset, and it's when we put meaning behind those words.
International matters took centre stage following a round-table business discussion.
We have to be clear in the face of Russian aggression. We have to stand together, to coordinate, stand with our allies and give Ukraine all of the support that it needs for as long as it needs.
Photo opportunities are one thing, but the Taoiseach and Prime Minister will need to decide what a reset in their relationship actually looks like. Symbolism is important here, but moving forward, they'll need to deliver substance over style.
Is this me here? Afternoon.
And there have already been announcements. A yearly summit between the two countries addressing trade, security, justice and climate. Both governments keen to send the message that when it comes to the relationship between Britain and Ireland, this is a new ball game. Sarah Gervin, BBC News in Dublin.
Well, for more on this, I spoke with David Hennig. He's been working to map out the post-Brexit future of the UK trade policy at his work at the think tank, the European Centre for International Political Economy. Now, he says that while the optics are good, there's still a lot of work to do.
It's always a good start for leaders of countries to talk to each other, to promise to work together. It gets a lot harder when they actually have to put that into some kind of detail. I mean, one of the subjects that wasn't mentioned there is Northern Ireland, where there's clearly a large shared interest between the UK and Ireland. There's various issues like energy outstanding, various issues with the implementation of the Northern Ireland Protocol and the Windsor Framework. And then there's the wider UK-EU relations and the deepening there. So good optics, good start, lots more to do.
So when it comes to lots more to do, you're working out the post-Brexit relationship, the UK trade policy. what do they need to focus on? How do they take it forward? Because, as you say, there are still quite a lot of sticking points.
There's actually a huge agenda for the UK's relations with the EU and with member states such as Ireland. So, for example, trade is mentioned a lot, trade in goods to reduce the barriers. So, for example, a food and drink agreement, trade in services to allow people to move more easily for work. There's discussions around mobility. Mobility of touring artists is something the UK want. Youth mobility is something the EU want. There are shared challenges in terms of energy and climate change. That particularly affects Ireland, where, given that there is a shared energy market across the island of Ireland, so there's security was mentioned there, and that's one of the earliest discussions that's ongoing about a security pact between the UK and the EU. We're told that a lot of this won't start in real anger, the negotiations, until December or January. That's because the EU is forming a new commission, so they're not all in place yet to start this. But it's on details like that that will that will put into practice the warm words that we're seeing from the leaders now.
David Hennig there. Well, meanwhile, in his first major interview since becoming the Prime Minister, Sir Keir has told the BBC that the previous government broke the NHS in ways which were unforgivable. Speaking exclusively to Sunday with Laura Kuenssberg, he said a review of the health service to be published in the coming week finds the Conservatives' changes to the NHS were hopelessly misconceived, and austerity in the coalition years, followed by the pandemic, had left the NHS in a perilous, awful position.
Everybody watching this who has used the NHS or relatives have know that it's broken. They know that it's broken. That is unforgivable, the state of our NHS. The last government broke the NHS. Our job now, through Lord Darcy, is properly understand how that came about and bring about the reforms, starting with the first steps, the 40,000 extra appointments. But we've got to do the hard yards of reform as well. And as I say, I think it's only a Labour government that can do the reform that our NHS needs, and we'll start on that journey.
Our political correspondent Leila Nathu told me more about Labour's core mission to fix the NHS after years of Conservative reforms.
Yeah, remember, this is one of Labour's core missions, trying to fix the NHS, in their words, getting the NHS back on its feet. So you can understand why Keir Starmer wants to deploy what we have become quite familiar with from the government since they took charge, blaming the Conservative Party for the state of the NHS. And this is blaming successive Conservative governments. He's talking about reforms going back to the coalition government in 2010, big structural reforms led by the then Health Secretary Andrew Lansley. And he's mentioning this review, a review that was commissioned within days of Labour taking charge by the former Labour MP Lord Darcy, now carrying out an independent review into the whole state of the NHS, talking about access to healthcare services, talking about the performance of the NHS and the quality of healthcare and any inequalities in terms of all of those three aspects. So this is going to provide the kind of context for a big, longer-term look at the NHS that the Labour wants to take, part of what it's calling fixing the foundation. So it's a really central part of what the Labour government is trying to do. In addition to their first steps, the kind of short-term fixes that they're promising, thousands of new appointments, getting people to come in on evenings and weekends. So, you can see why Keir Starmer is trying to present this very bleak picture of the state of the NHS. It chimes with everything that we've heard about various other parts of the public sector. Prisons, for example, we've been talking about recently, blaming the Conservatives. I mean, the Tories, for their part, are really kind of trying to defend their records. Certainly, the last Tory government, the Shadow Health Secretary, Victoria Atkins, talking about the Tories having put more doctors in the NHS, more nurses, and accusing the Conservative Party of politicising children's health. Now, this is because we've had some early findings from this report by Lord Darcy. It's going to be released on Thursday, but we have some early indications of the kind of things that he's talking about. For example, falling vaccination rates among children, growing rates of prescriptions for ADHD medications, a rise in hospital admissions for children and young people with eating disorders. So he's presenting this big picture to the government on Thursday that the government will take away, the Health Secretary Wes Streeting will take away, and that will inform a longer 10-year plan.
But given that Sir Keir Starmer was really adamant, really scathing about the Conservatives and the state that he, in his words, have left the NHS, the Tories have, you mentioned their Shadow Health Secretary Victoria Atkins, they have hit back.
Yeah, I mean, they're defending their records. Certainly the previous, Victoria Atkins was the Health Secretary in the previous government. She is now the shadow Health Secretary, defending the Tories' records about, workforce and improvements to the NHS in their views that they made, and accusing, as I said, Keir Starmer of politicising children's health.
And Layla, this week, just on a different story, but still on politics, we had the damning report into the Grenfell Tower fire. Today, we're getting in the morning papers, I believe it is, Michael Gove, the former Housing Secretary, has spoken. What has he said?
Yeah, so obviously a huge range of actors across a number of years criticised in that report from the Grenfell inquiry. In tomorrow's Sunday Times, Michael Gove, the former Housing Secretary in the previous administration, is writing his response for the first time. I mean, many characters, many players in this over time. And he starts in this piece that he's written for the Sunday Times with an apology to those who lost their lives in the Grenfell fire, to relatives, families, campaigners and survivors, saying that they were let down by successive governments, including those in which he played a part. And he talks about the efforts, really, that he tried to go through, in his view, to take action against some of the companies who the inquiry had accused of systematic dishonesty. Some of the companies that made and sold the cladding, which was around the Grenfell Tower. And he talks about, in his time as Housing Secretary, trying to go after them and trying to persuade other countries too. And he talks about trying to, for example, restrict imports of some of the company's products, and saying he ran up against bureaucracy. So this is Michael Gove, I think, for the first time giving his response to his part in the government's response to the Grenfell Tower fire, which of course took place and played out over many years.
Layla Nathu there, and I'm sure Michael Gove's comments will be picked up on Laura's programme Sunday with Laura Koonsberg, and you can also watch her interview, the full interview with the Prime Minister. That will be at 9 o'clock in the morning on BBC One, of course on the news channel, and you'll also be able to catch up with that on the BBC iPlayer. The US Secretary of State, Antony Blinken, will travel to London on Monday for a two-day visit, during which he will meet the Foreign Secretary, David Lammy. The US State Department says that Mr. Blinken will open a so-called US-UK strategic dialogue. Well, with more on this is our correspondent, David Waddell. So what can we expect from this?
Well, Washington says this is about reaffirming the special relationship. That's a phrase we've all heard many times before. It's a phrase that's especially important to UK governments. It was used first by Winston Churchill in the aftermath of the Second World War. And the US understands that this is an important phrase for British governments, so it's chosen to use that phrase. The kind of issues we expect them to be discussing, it's been briefed that the Indo-Pacific issues, in particular conflict issues with China in the South China Sea, that kind of thing. The AUKUS security partnership between Australia, UK and the United States, that will come up. Issues in the Middle East, particularly with this Gaza conflict ongoing. And also the situation in Ukraine. They're all likely to come up. I should say also that on Friday, that is yesterday, the White House announced that Sir Keir Starmer would travel to the US for a bilateral meeting with President Biden, the second in their respective terms of office. That will happen this coming Friday.
So arguably they're building those relationships with Biden, of course, Antony Blinken here. But I guess David Lammy and the UK government have to think about what potentially could happen in November, say, with a Trump possible administration. What's that kind of relationship like?
Well, this election could go either way, couldn't it? We're just 2 months away from that US election, potentially just 4 months away from a change of administration, whether it's a Harris administration or a Trump administration. David Lammy is an outspoken MP. As a backbencher, he once said back in 2018, Trump is not only a woman-hating, neo-Nazi sympathising sociopath, he's also a profound threat to the international order. So the challenge is, how does he manage that relationship with the United States, having said those things in the past? He's rode back a little. He's not disavowed himself from those comments, but he has noted that many people at the time said sharp things about the president at the time, but has also said, of course, he would be prepared to work with any administration, be it Trump, Biden or Harris. What's more interesting in a way is what he has to say about Trump's vice presidential pick, that's J.D. Vance. We understand that David Lammy's team has been working to get to know J.D. Vance's team for some time. David Lammy said this about J.D. Vance: "We're both from poor backgrounds, both suffered addiction issues in our family, which we've written about, both of us Christians." He said they've been able to find common ground. He's met J.D. Vance. Apparently they have a relationship that they can work with. Of course, our relationship, the UK's relationship with the US is important. It's important for the leaders and the Foreign Secretary, US Secretary of State to be able to work with each other.
David, as always, thank you very much for bringing that to our attention, David Waddell. Thank you very much. Now, a rare event took place today in London when Richard Moore, he's the head of MI6, and the CIA director William Burns appeared in public together for the first time at a public event. Mr. Burns, who's been central to efforts to reach a ceasefire in the Middle East, said that the US was working with other mediators to refine the existing framework for a deal. Also discussed Ukraine's seizure of the Russian territory of Kursk, which was described as a significant tactical achievement. Let's listen in.
It's absolutely critical that we do sustain our support to Ukraine. And it's really difficult. It's hard. And particularly in eastern Ukraine, this is attritional warfare where there is a huge amount of suffering on both sides. And Putin is pushing forward in a sort of attritional Pyrrhic campaign of taking village by village as he goes forward. When he takes those, there's nothing left. I mean, that's why I used deliberately used the term Pyrrhic. There is nothing left because everything is utterly destroyed. But that is the Kremlin way of war. That's what they did in Grozny. It's what they did in Aleppo. And it's what they're now doing in it. So it is tough, but it's also important to remember that our Ukrainian friends have an absolute will to fight. And it's important to remember how this started. This started in this phase with Putin mounting a war of aggression in February 2022. And 2.5 years later, that failed. It continues to fail. The Ukrainians will continue to fight. We will continue to help them to fight.
We have to all remember that despite all of that work that needs to be done, this is ultimately a question of political will. And this gets to your question. Whether or not leaders on both sides are prepared to recognize that enough is enough and that the time has come finally to make some hard choices and some difficult compromises. I hope profoundly that both of those leaders are going to make that decision because, as I said, there's an enormous amount at stake here.
Well, Daniel Lomas is an assistant professor at the School of Politics and International Relations at the University of Nottingham, and he explained the significance of this first public meeting between the top UK and US spy chiefs.
It's important to see a joint front here between the two top UK and US spy chiefs. And I'd say the message they're giving off is one that is essentially fact-based, that we do face in the West an existential threat from countries like China, obviously with Russia and post the Russian invasion of Ukraine. And I think that it was an uncompromising message here, that parts of the message that they were delivering were quite pessimistic in some sense, that for those in the West who believe that Putin is suddenly going to collapse, the essential message here from both was that no significant cracks have emerged within the Kremlin itself. But this was a tough, uncompromising picture that we're painting, that was essentially one of trying to paint truth to power, I think, about the situation at the moment within the West and the security situation we face.
It's a bleak picture that they do offer. They were talking specifically when it comes to Russia. They said that they had been warning Ukraine ahead of that full-scale invasion in February 2022. Just the kind of workings that they're now doing in order to warn the rest of the population. Is it alarming? Are we to take this? Is it beneficial for the international community, for lay people like us to hear this?
Well, what we're seeing here is this is yes, a significant moment. It's the first time that the head of SIS, MI6 and the CIA have spoken in person in a public setting. But this is part of a broader package of briefings by senior Western intelligence officials on the situation both in Ukraine and the security situation more broadly. So it's part of a broader picture. In terms of the messaging here and why they're doing it, when we're looking, for example, at polling, both in the UK and the US, it could be argued that senior officials are perhaps seen as more trusted, let's say, to deliver than some of these key lines than some of the politicians out there. So I think that this message and the people delivering the message, this is one of fact-based, it's intelligence-led, it's shaped by the information that Western intelligence agencies themselves are collecting. And this is a continuation, really, and you mentioned Ukraine, this is really a continuation of that process that was happening before the invasion, where we were declassifying and releasing small bits of intelligence in a public setting, both in part, I think, as reassurance that, yes, the West is doing something about the threat posed by Russia, China and other states out there, but it's also, again, to act as a warning that we need to be vigilant within the West. You know, these statements are being made at a time when support for the Ukraine war remains relatively high within the West, but in terms of the news cycle, Ukraine is slipping behind the front pages here. So they're trying to kind of bolster this image of that Ukraine is fighting Russia, and it's a story that needs to continue to be in the headlines.
Daniel Lomas there, Assistant Professor from the University of Nottingham. Now, I want to take you to Papua New Guinea because that is where His Holiness Pope Francis is holding a Mass. This is in Port Moresby, and this is part of what's being described as an ambitious 12-day trip to 4 countries. He arrived in Papua New Guinea on Friday, and that was after a trip to Indonesia. He's going to be there until Monday. He met a little bit earlier on today with impoverished children and young people with disabilities at a school in Papua New Guinea before then gathering with church representatives from Pacific Island nations. And he's calling for the better treatment of workers in Papua New Guinea, which is a nation of around 600 islands in the southwestern Pacific, and where there are concerns it's become a major target of international companies for its gas, gold and various other reserves. So the Pope now using a wheelchair due to knee and back pain, but he is on this, what's being described as an ambitious 12-day trip to 4 countries, and he is holding a Mass live in Port Moresby in Papua New Guinea. Now, here in the UK, there have been tense scenes in Glasgow as 2 separate demonstrations took place. One promoted by the far right attracted hundreds to a rally against immigration. They were outnumbered by another rally held under the banner Stand Up to Racism, which attracted at least 2,000 people. Officers kept the 2 sides apart, with police saying that there were 2 arrests. Spanish police looking for a British man in a mountainous area of Mallorca, where a British woman was found dead earlier this week, say that they found a body. Both are believed to have been swept away in a flash flood. Police say that they'd been hiking on a trail which leads through a small canyon to the sea when a storm hit the island. Tens of thousands of left-wing protesters have demonstrated in Paris and other French towns and cities against the appointment of Michel Barnier as the country's Prime Minister. President Macron gave him the post on Thursday, ending 2 months of deadlock following inconclusive parliamentary elections. While Mr Barnier spent Saturday afternoon visiting a children's hospital in Paris, he was asked about the protests.
I don't want to waste time with controversies. I hear words like power grab. That's not the spirit we are after here. The spirit is to bring together as many MPs as possible for a government of action and with a project and with a spirit of cooperation. It's not about a power grab, and we'll see that those MPs who express their views and give us their confidence will be a very important part of an assembly that is very divided. But I repeat, I do not want to get into controversy.
Now let's take a look at what's making the front pages of Sunday's newspapers. And let's start with the Mirror, which is leading with an exclusive. Oasis in talks to take their tour global, flagging the US, Mexico and Argentina as potential destinations. It's light and shade on the front page of the Sunday Times, an exclusive into a surgeon who worked at a major London children's hospital, beside photos of the former sub-postmaster Sir Alan Bates getting married on Sir Richard Branson's private island. The Observer's leading on the NHS story that we brought you a little earlier, looking ahead to a report on the state of the healthcare system in the UK. Headlining the Mail are some claims of the UK's highest earners are preparing to flee the country as Chancellor Rachel Reeves fails to rule out tax rises for the rich. The Sunday People leads with calls for the union boss to use those wealth levies to fund the cuts to winter fuel payments. And segueing nicely into the Sunday Times, which is focusing on the winter fuel payment in its own way, warning of a revolt against Starmer for what Labour sources have described as shameful. So you're up to date with the morning papers. Now, as we heard in the papers there, Oasis are working hard to convince their fans to not look back in anger after the disappointment caused by dynamic ticket pricing for their reunion tour last weekend. The band's confirmed that they will send out invites for a private ballot for their final Wembley Stadium dates overnight. The Gallagher brothers said that those eligible will be fans that signed into a Ticketmaster account on Saturday the 31st when tickets first went on sale. It comes after the band extended their Live 25 tour to include 2 more London shows on September the 27th and 28th. Now, we've received a very happy update on Sir Alan Bates, the former sub-postmaster who successfully campaigned for justice in the Post Office Horizon scandal. He's married his partner, Susan Sercombe. And now, if that wasn't lovely enough already, just guess where they had their wedding. Well, it was Sir Richard Branson's private island, as you do. The Virgin tycoon invited the couple to the island after reportedly reading a comment that Sir Alan made in an interview with the Sunday Times, in which he said that if Sir Richard Branson is reading this, I'd love a holiday. Well, ask and you shall receive. Last month, the 70-year-old and the new Lady Bates took to the British Virgin Islands, where none other than Sir Richard himself officiated the ceremony. And this comes after a massive year for Sir Alan, who fought to clear the names of hundreds of sub-postmasters wrongly accused of theft and false accounting. Congratulations to the happy couple. Now, summer may be over, but festival season isn't quite yet. The BBC is staging its Radio 2 in the Park over the weekend in Preston. It kicked off last night and we'll see live music performances with some of the world's most loved pop stars. Headline acts will feature the likes of Sting, the Sugar Babes and the Pet Shop Boys. And my colleague Lola Schroer caught up with the Sugar Babes, who gave her an exclusive interview.
We've been treated to amazing music here at BBC Radio 2 in the Park in Preston. The day started off with Travis taking to the stage and the crowd quickly filled up to around 30,000 people who saw the likes of Shaznay Lewis, Craig David, Pixie Lott and Sting take to the stage. But we also got to speak to a few artists like Shaznay, who I've already mentioned, and some Radio 2 DJs like OJ Borge and Joe Wiley. But we also got an exclusive for you. So I sat down with the Sugar Babes and asked them just how much they've enjoyed this summer of performing at festivals like Radio 2 in the Park. Guys, that performance was incredible. How did it feel to be in Preston performing to that many people?
It was amazing. We had so much fun. It's our last show of this summer. And so, yeah, it was a bit like sad, but yeah, we had a lot of fun.
You've had an amazing summer, literally selling out crowds everywhere from Glastonbury to Preston. What's next?
Oh my God! Well, we've got a few more shows in Europe, which we're all looking forward to.
Working in Australia,
yeah,
new music, lots of studio time to finish off the bits that we really love, the new record.
So yeah, hopefully soon.
Yeah. Okay, talking about the new record. Now I heard you say on stage, talking about UK garage. Can we expect any of that in the new record, or are we going in a different direction?
We feel like our music is kind of genreless, so I feel like we'll touch on a lot of things that we're influenced by, but it's all a bit top secret.
We definitely touch on it, though. We definitely touch on it. So.
I think it's something we've all grown up with, so it's always going to be in our roots to kind of put the influence in, I guess.
Now, Keisha, you said that you've been performing or knowing each other since you were 11 or 12. How does it feel? Like, are you proud of where you've got, the crowds that you're selling out? How does it feel to be together now?
It feels so good because we're enjoying ourselves. I think it's a bit different. Like when you're a bit older, you can kind of take it all in. So yeah, it feels really good because it hasn't happened overnight. We've been working on where we are today for the last really 12 years. So it's amazing to, get the love that we have and support from our fans.
Anything to add to that?
To be honest, it's just really lovely to work with two lovely ladies that I've known for all my life. And to be honest, they're probably the longest friends I've had.
No,
so
absolutely. We're each other's oldest friends, and we genuinely love working with each other. we make sure that we make the most out of every day, no matter where we are. We get out and see everywhere, and we enjoy. We want to enjoy what we do, and we're, as Kasia said, like just taking it all in and making the most of it.
Thank you so much for joining us on BBC News. You can catch the Sugar Babes performance on BBC iPlayer and BBC Sounds.
They sound so lovely. Right, that is it from me. I will be back here tomorrow. But now here on BBC News, it's time for the media show.